So back in March, I made the tough decision to switch from Sony to Fuji, selling all of my Sony gear and picking up a Fujifilm X-T5. So after 7 months with the X-T5, I feel that I've spent enough time with the camera to get a good feel for it. So I felt this was a great time to give an update on my time with the camera so far. I'll be talking about film simulations, autofocus, video performance and more. So let's get into it. So I'll be completely honest, with Fuji's film simulations, I mostly just use these as a starting point for my edits. I've recently been working on a cinematic street photography video where the general theme is a very gloomy, moody look to the shots, and it's been really handy to shoot in the classic negative film simulation in camera to get an idea of the final image. However, quite often now I will shoot in the standard Fuji look in camera because being able to cycle through all the film simulation options in Lightroom means that if I'm not going for a specific look, I don't need to worry too much until the edit. I do have custom film recipes saved in each custom slot on the camera, which I've found on the Fuji X Weekly app, which I experimented with quite early on in my time with the camera, and I plan to cover these a little more in the future. So the autofocus on Fuji cameras has been the subject of some controversy this year, with a firmware update causing some issues with the autofocus. It's not something I'm going to go into too much detail about, as you can find plenty of articles, Reddit posts and opinions online, but I can personally say that I haven't had any issues with my X-T5 being as up to date as possible. In fact, I wasn't even aware of these issues until I started getting some comments mentioning it. To give an example, I recently went to a couple of motorsport events at Donington Park, where the X-T5's autofocus performed extremely well. On average, with a panning shot, I was getting about 60% of the shots in focus, which for me is good enough when I'm shooting an object moving between 120 to 150 miles per hour. Of course, there are also other elements involved here, such as the focusing speed of the lens, which on my 55-200 is decent enough, and the human factor of making sure I'm moving the camera at the correct speed to match the car. Having previously used the 24.2 megapixel Sony a7 III, I was excited to make the step up to a 40.2 megapixel sensor in the X-T5. When I first started using the X-T5, however, I didn't realise quite how useful this would be, allowing me to crop shots when editing without losing much quality at all. This has been particularly useful in street photography, where I prefer a more subtle approach and don't like to get in people's faces too much. Given that most of my street shots with the X-T5 have been with the 18-55 lens, the sensor allows me to get much more creative in post with my framing, rather than having to get the framing perfect in the original shot. Now, cinematic is a word that gets thrown around a lot these days, but that is generally the look that I like to go for in my street photography. The images I'm able to achieve straight out of the camera with the X-T5 I feel match my style pretty closely, which leaves only a few adjustments to be made when editing. And as much as I love the editing side of photography, it is time consuming, and less time spent editing is more time to focus on photography or video editing. So this year I've put an increased focus on the videography side of my YouTube channel. In the past, the majority of my videos were shot in a POV style on a GoPro. However, I found this style has become a little bit stale, both for myself in creating videos and for viewers. I just don't find them to be very engaging. While making this change, I've had to put a lot more effort into the B-roll I shoot for my videos, and the X-T5 has been a very important part of this. Despite being able to shoot at 6.2K, I don't feel there's a need for this on YouTube, and so with any of my B-roll, I'm usually shooting at 4K and 24 frames per second. Again, I'm going to use the word cinematic here, as that's what I'm aiming for in my B-roll, and I feel this is something that's very achievable straight from the camera with the X-T5, requiring minimal amounts of colour grading in post. I do find that even with the camera's in-body stabilisation and with using lenses with Fuji's optical image stabilisation, I do still need a gimbal to get nice smooth shots. So unless I'm using my gimbal, the majority of my handheld shots are static to prevent too much camera shake. Since switching to the X-T5, I've not done quite as much street photography as I'd hoped. However, in September I was able to spend a week and a half working in London, where I spent every evening out with the X-T5. I do feel there's a moment with every camera where you feel a change in the quality of shots you're taking, and this was that moment for me. I love London for street photography, and there's something about the city that just inspires me. I can safely say that the shots I took over this week and a half are easily some of the best I've taken as a street photographer, and have set a standard that I want to strive towards every time I shoot street photography. I do feel that using the X-T5 played a big part in this, in allowing me to create the kind of shots that match my style so easily. I've also done quite a lot of landscape photography since switching to the X-T5. Mostly this was on a trip to Wales back in July, which of course I'm still editing the photos from. While my landscape photography is nothing too serious, I'm happy overall with the shots I'm able to achieve, and I love to revisit some of the locations where I've taken some of my favourite landscape shots, such as Glencoe and Loch Lomond, to be able to compare shots taken on the Sony a7 III to ones taken on the X-T5. And finally, another style that I've tried my hand at this year was motorsport photography, having headed to a few races at Donington and Harewood Hill. This is a style that's really clicked with me that I'm hoping to continue building a portfolio in, and the X-T5 has been an integral part of this so far. With motorsport photography, I generally use the X-T5's electronic shutter, as I found the mechanical shutter can be a little slow when buffering. I've tried both the Fuji 70-300 and the 55-200, which is now part of my kit, and although the 70-300 is a little sharper, I couldn't justify the price difference, and so the 55-200 is more than enough for now. So am I happy with the X-T5 so far? Well, that's a big yes. I do still need to complete my current lens setup, and I have the intention of buying the Fuji 90mm f2 in the near future. This was a lens that I spent quite a bit of time with when I was in London, and I was really impressed with the shots I was able to achieve with it. I do feel that my street photography is better than ever on the X-T5, and a lot of that I'd put down to the camera's ability to create incredible cinematic images straight out of the camera with very minimal editing. The X-T5 has also helped to reignite my love for videography, and has allowed me to achieve some incredible results within motorsport photography for a beginner. My usual time with a camera so far before switching gear has been around 1 to 2 years, but I can easily see myself sticking with the X-T5 for at least another 3 to 4. I am still a little bit tempted to pick up an X100VI at some point, which I would use more as a second camera for everyday use, but as the main camera body I'm using, the X-T5 is perfect for me right now. If you did enjoy this video, please give it a like, please subscribe, and go and check out some of my other work. Also go and give me a follow over on Instagram, where I post all the shots from my videos. Again, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.